Jason, good to see you again here. The presidential race, Trump leads Biden by 12 points. That's nearly twice as much as Trump won by 4 years ago. Despite all his criminal trials, is Trump getting more popular in Texas?
Certainly it looks like it, right? These numbers were a bit surprising based on what we just saw in the last election. He won by 6 points last time. This time he's doubled that. Does that speak to his strength or to Biden's weakness? You know, the jury's still out. I will say this, it's a bit early right now to be making any kind of final determinations about where this lands, but it certainly shows that Trump has been robust and very strong all across the board and in all segments.
This poll is a flag in the ground right now. What does it tell us about November?
I think it tells us that Trump is remaining strong, even in spite of some of the different controversies that he faces. But what really stuck out to me was two things. Number one, that his strength was across the board. It wasn't just one segment. Even with women, for instance, he's doing well. But most importantly, he's winning a majority of Hispanics in Texas. Now, that is almost unprecedented. George W. Bush was able to do that. But at 47% right now, Trump is actually ahead of Biden with Hispanics statewide. Now, that's just something that's remarkable and worthy of note.
Why is that? I mean, it seems like Trump has always kind of been popular with Hispanics. The GOP's done better in the Valley lately. I mean, Democrats still kind of dominate down there, but the GOP is really investing down there. Is that paying off, or is it Trump himself?
Well, I think it's more a function of Trump himself. He has this cult of personality that Hispanic men really appeals to Hispanic men, and he also appeals strongly to Hispanic evangelicals. So the Hispanic vote in Texas today divided among Hispanic evangelicals and Catholics. The evangelicals growing that group, and they are very supportive of former President Trump.
Trump is doing well with women. Despite abortion restrictions happening in this state and nationwide. That surprised me. He leads by 10 points against Biden with women voters.
Well, that number was striking to me. Remember, it's early in this race, and our poll had a margin of error of only 2.5%.
It was small.
So I think that's an accurate number, that 10%. Does that mean that he will continue to hold that kind of strength going into November? The jury remains out on that. I mean, technically and figuratively, right? The jury certainly is out right now all across the country, and that may have an impact down the road. I do think we'll see this number tighten to what it was back in the last election cycle, so it goes from 12 to maybe 6 to 10 points, but I don't think that Biden is going to be winning Texas this cycle.
So the big news from this poll is the U.S. Senate race in Texas. And I wanted to start with the presidential race so we could kind of frame the Senate race. Trump leads by 12. Ted Cruz only leads Colin Allred by 5 points. Why is he underperforming?
Well, given the context of what we just talked about, the fact that this poll shows that Trump has a wide margin, the fact that Allred is within 5 points of Ted Cruz really is something to note. And this is why. Because it shows us two things. Number one, that Allred is overperforming his base. He's actually doing better than President Biden among traditional Democratic voters. But more importantly, Cruz is underperforming dramatically his base. Trump way ahead in his race in Texas statewide. But Cruz only able to cobble together a 5% lead in April. Remember, we haven't even started the crux of the election cycle, which will start in earnest in September after Labor Day. Money hasn't really been spent, but Allred is already showing the kind of strength that Beto showed well before Beto was showing it. And so I think if the distance to get to the point where it's close is only 5 points, Colin Allred is in a very good shape going into the election cycle of the summer and the fall.
It's still way early, but is Cruz really in danger?
Oh, I think he is. I think Cruz has been in danger for a decade now, right?
But he's won.
But remember how he won last time. He beat Beto by 2 percentage points. And those 2 percentage points came from rural voters and from traditional Republicans. Well, it's been about 6 years now, and guess what's happened? A lot of new voters have moved in from other parts of the country, New York and California, and unfortunately, many of our friends in the rural areas have passed away. So there's no longer that strength in the rural areas that we saw before. Texas is urbanizing quickly, and those urban voters are more likely to vote for a Democrat than they are for a Republican, and we're seeing that in these races, in this race particularly.
So you have another poll coming out this coming week. What else stood out to you, though, in the numbers that you guys released the other day?
So we have the second part of this poll that will be coming out where we're talking about gambling in Texas, whether or not we should have these destination resort casinos. But the most important issue that we'll talk about next week will be the report that we have on what we call vouchers. This is taxpayer-funded subsidies for people that want to send their kids to private school. This is something that Abbott thinks is very important. He's actually motivated his base to come out and vote for candidates that are in favor of this. But we're seeing by a wide margin that Texans are not in favor of taxpayer subsidized subsidies for private school.
So what does that mean to Abbott then? He staked a lot on this. There are a number of incumbent Republicans that lost last month in their primary.
They did, and if I were them, I would still continue to be very concerned about that. But I think if you are in the rural areas of Texas where these school districts mean so much to the community and to the economy, you have to stand firm with your community or you'll be unelected either way. You're either going to be tossed out by the voters in your district for being against public schools, or Governor Abbott's going to come after you with a ton of money to beat you in a primary. So it's they got to pick their poison. Having been a former state representative, I always stood with my community. I suspect that the state reps that have to face this challenge are going to do the same and stand with their communities.
Let's talk about the other big race besides the Senate race here in Texas. This one's coming up next month. Dade Phelan, the Speaker of the House, running for re-election. He's the underdog. Can he win re-election?
I think he can.
Do you think he does? I guess I should ask you, do you think he will win re-election?
Well, I'm a big fan of the movie Trading Places, and we know that the standard bet that I always have is the same one that Mortimer had, $1. And if I were betting my $1, I would say that Dade Phelan will pull it out. I think he wins. Here's why. The same reason that I was mentioning before about the communities. They know Dade Phelan. They know his wife. They know his children. He's been a part of that community for many years, and he served them conservatively and well. He's ushered in some of the most conservative legislation that we've seen in Texas history, and they remember that. Just because people come from outside and spend a lot of money and there's ugly flyers in the mail and commercials doesn't mean that they're going to somehow abandon him. I think he pulls it out very closely. Whether or not he's the Speaker again, I think that it remains to be seen, but I think he wins this race in the runoff.
Even with all the money being spent on this race, I mean, Phelan was second against David Covey, and then the third place finisher, she even endorsed Covey. But you think that Phelan can still get around that?
I'm a firm believer that money is not dispositive. Money is like having a good resume or having an affable personality. It helps to have money when you have an election, but it's not dispositive. Just because one party has more money than the other does not always mean that the party with the most money wins. I think Phelan will be able to bring together his constituencies that supported him in the past, and his community will stand by him, and he'll win this race.
What would a win mean for centrist Republicans?
Well, look, this is the battle that we've been waiting for in the Republican Civil War, right? You've got the right that's coming after the centrist. Who would call Dade Phelan a centrist? Back 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
He's very much a conservative Republican, but he stands now for the classic Reagan-style Republican. I think it's important. Look, we saw a lot of centrist Republicans taken out. You're looking at one of them, right? I was taken out, and over the last decade, we've seen more and more of the centrist Republicans being removed from office. He's one of the last ones standing. He wins. I think that means that there's still hope for Chamber of Commerce types and community types, and so it's important that he wins this race.
If he doesn't win, what does that mean?
Well, look, I think we're already seeing a movement to the right in Texas under politics. I think you're going to see us fall off the cliff in the next election cycle. The kinds of legislation that we've seen with open carry and zero exception abortion bans, those are the kinds of things that you're going to see more and more in Texas. And the legislation's only going to get further and further to the right. And I just don't think Texas is there anymore. Texas remains a center-right state, but we're certainly not in a state like, say, Arizona, where we want bans, for instance, without any exceptions for rape or incest or health of the mother. And that's where we're going if we lose someone like Dade.
And finishing up with a poll here, too, how can people find this poll to go through it? This was 1,600 people that you guys interviewed last week, April 5th through the 10th, and a small margin of error, 2.45%. That's pretty good. It's a larger pool of folks that you guys sampled. Where can people find it if they want to go through it?
Well, it's going to be obviously in the newspapers, right? So you'll see it there. But if you want to read the report and you want to read all of the tabs, and you're a political nerd like me and you want to go deep into the numbers and in the backgrounds, you're going to go to txhpf.org, and you're going to find the poll there. You'll see our poll
Research
and
tab.
all of our research reports that are there, and you'll see the press release that went along with it, and you'll see all of the tabs and all of the information that went into putting this poll together.
TXHPF for Texas Hispanic Policy
Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation, txhpf.org. That's important.
.org.
We're a 501c3 and we're nonpartisan, so we have an org rather than a com.
Gotcha. Jason, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it.
So great to be here. Thank you, Jason, for having me.